I'm Soft Seaside and welcome to this new video. Today we finally start the new series where I take you with me step by step while I reboot my old comic AC New Insights that I've worked on for 12 years since I was a teenager. I've created a little playlist so you can watch the whole series in one go. I highly recommend watching the previous video where I talk about the origin of my old webcomic and why I wanted to reboot it, so you know the context to understand this video. The new comic itself will also have a new name, but I haven't completely decided on it yet, so we will just call it Reboot for now. I've also read your suggestions for the name of this YouTube series and I chose the title Reboot Ramble. Thanks to Chromsina for this great name. I knew that someone would come up with a better idea. What will this video be about? Today we want to look at the story of the old version and try to improve it. I told you that one of the main reasons why I decided to start over again is the beginning. The beginning was a mess because I decided to draw this comic on a whim without any plan and just drew whatever came to my mind. It means that I had to come up with a plot while drawing, at least at the start. At some point I did have a rough draft of how the story would go, a draft that I edited a lot of times the older I got, but nonetheless, I felt very limited. Limited in what the characters could do, limited in the settings they were in. They were high school students in Japan, and I was not able to put foreshadowing in the beginning. Also, the world building was not fully planned out, but that's a topic for a future part of my Reboot Ramble. So today I want to improve the story. Before we begin, very big disclaimer, this video is not a tutorial. It's mainly for me to hold myself accountable, to finally work on my comic reboot, and to show you guys my approach, methods, and learning process. I did some research regarding the terminology because I wanted to know what I talk about, but oh boy did I fall into a rabbit hole. I thought that lots of these words are interchangeable, but apparently they are not. So I will probably use these theoretical terms wrongly because even in my research people mixed up all these words together and honestly I'm so confused. I will just use words like plot, story, structure, outline according to my own understanding, so please don't take anything I say to heart. I'm not an expert on any of the stuff I talk about at all. I highly recommend doing your own research. All my resources are in the description if you want to check them out. That being said, you probably can still learn what not to do when planning a comic or get some ideas how you want to approach your own story. One day I would love to make some actual tutorials about comics, but right now my main focus is to get my comic reboot started. How do we improve the story of AC New Insights? At first I wanted to tell you the basic plot of AC New Insights, what I liked, what I disliked about it, and what I want to change. I had the script fully written when I discovered the 7 elements of story, which include plot, setting, characters, tone, point of view, theme, and conflict. And I decided to change my whole script. Yay! I want to look at each of these 7 elements compared with the old comic version and think about how I would change it in the reboot. Some of these elements will only be discussed shortly since they will be covered in future Reboot Ramble videos. So let's dive in. We start with the plot. Before finding out about the 7 elements of story, I wanted to simply call this segment plot or story, but while researching I learned that there's a difference between these two terms. As far as I'm concerned, plot is the chain of events that happen during a narrative that is directly shown to the readers. It answers the question, what is happening? For example, person A goes to the grocery store to buy a candy, and then person B steals the candy and runs away. Story is filling the rest, what makes the narrative special, what the narrative is about, like characters, conflicts, just like the 7 elements of story describe. Story answers the question, why is it happening? Back to our example with the candy thief. The story would be person A goes to the grocery store to buy candies to give them to their hungry child. Their family is very poor right now and can only afford truly necessary stuff. To make their child happy, person A wants to surprise their child with candy. Meanwhile, person B is in desperate search for a very specific candy because they have a pact with the devil who wants this very rare candy or person B dies. Person B finally finds the candy, but person A buys it before them, so they steal it and run away. Very ridiculous example, but you get the gist. Sounds easy enough, right? except that some sources switched the definitions and were like, okay, plot describes the chain of events and story is the why, and then the next video I would watch would be like, plot is the why and story is the chain of events, and I was so confused and I just I don't know if it's because film uses the terminology differently than literature, but here I am, very confused. For this video, I will go by the definitions I just told you. I just wanted to share my pain with you. Thanks for listening. I will probably use these words as synonym at some point anyway. I'm sorry. So let's finally talk about the plot by watching the summary from my previous video that explains what happens in the story. First day of high school for our 16-year-old protagonist, Yui Asaoka, and she meets a very handsome boy, Shiro Watanabe. He instantly develops a crush for him until she finds out that he's the school's crush. The most popular guy in school everyone is fawning about. Oh no! Yui then quickly decides to brush his feelings aside to avoid being hurt, but then decides to become friends with him instead. And who would have thought they become really good friends? Shiro seems to be a chill, down-to-earth, and nice guy, not an arrogant, self-loving narcissist as Yui thought he would be. They spend some time together, and after 2 weeks of school, suddenly 2 new students join the class. Because of course you need some mysterious exchange students. The new students, Yukiko Tanaka and Naoki Nakamura. They are quite odd and mysterious, and they stalk Shiro. They follow him everywhere he goes, ask him very invasive questions, and seem to know him before coming to school. Well, stuff happens, and Yuri finds out that Yukiko, Naoki, and Shiro have supernatural powers. They belong to a secret organization called She's a secret organization for supernatural humans who fight against evil monsters who manipulate the memories of humans. To fight the monsters and the group of people who worship these creatures, they have to find the last Hana, translates into flower in Japanese, an extremely strong kind of senshi who were killed many years ago. By finding out about the mysteries of her friends, her family, and the world, Yui discovers secrets about herself she never knew about. In its core, the plot of the reboot will basically be the same. Yuri will be meeting Shiro, Naoki and Yukiko, have an encounter with a monster, and then find out about the supernatural mysteries and Yuri herself. But I have planned plenty of changes. First of all, I will completely rewrite the exposition, but that's something I want to talk about in another video. Secondly, I want to cut out all the insensitive and problematic shit, because young, unreflected teenage me didn't know any better. Of course, the new version will not be perfect, but I will try my best to be respectful with the content I present. Next point, romance. The romance plot was there because romance was in every story I consumed. I am not fond of the romance of Shiro and Yui, to be honest, but I like that Shiro is not an asshole. I really dislike these bad boy love interests who are just rude to their female counterparts, and I just wanted to make Shiro a nice guy. He sometimes does sus stuff, but that's more because I didn't know any better back then. I also like that Yui and Shiro are friends first. However, I became very picky with romance and stories. I don't really ship characters outside of canon, and I don't like romantic subplots just for the sake of having them. So I'm not sure if Yuri and Shiro will be romantically interested in each other in the new version. On to the next point, flowers. I love flowers and flower aesthetics, so I would really like to expand on this flower theme more in the reboot. For the next point, I'm not sure where to put this in the video, but there are some problems with the world building, which will be its own video in the Reboot Ramble series, but I want to mention them briefly. Monsters and memories. The idea of monsters who can manipulate the memories of humans is super interesting to me. I don't think that I have seen something like that before, but to be honest, I don't consume that much media lately. As I said in my previous video, self-reflection and self-improvement are important to me, and I think memories and experiences play a big role in that. However, the monsters got really unimportant later on in the old version. I didn't do a lot with the memory loss, and I have to think about how to implement them, because in stories, amnesia is often used as an easy solution to create drama, and I don't want it to be cheap. Also, I heard that in real life, amnesia is very messy and messed up, so maybe I want to be more thoughtful about that. Secret organizations. I don't really enjoy categorizing between good and evil in my story. People are very complex. Very glad that these racial alignments are gone from D&D. Obviously, bad people and groups exist, but I like to try to make it more nuanced in my comic, even though I'm not a fan of morally grey characters myself. I think that I want to create one organization which includes the people with supernatural powers, and maybe there's like a subgroup of people who disagree and rebel against this organization, and some of them might be extremists. I'm certain that there are more things about the plot I want to change, but I don't want this video to be longer than it already is. By the way, according to the theory of the 7 elements of story, plot is actually defined by these 5 elements: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution/denouement. That's all I will say on these for now, since the next video about story structure will cover this topic. But I just want to briefly mention that these elements have been already roughly planned out in the outlines of both the old and the new comic version. Let's talk about the next element of the story: the setting. The old version of AC New Insights takes place in Japan in our current age, and these characters are Japanese, most of them in high school. As I said in my previous video, I am not Japanese and I don't want to create a story set in a country I don't really know that much about. I will put the new version in some fictional, unnamed fantasy European country, that's basically Germany, and I will also age up all the characters so that they're all adults. I just can't relate to being a teenager anymore. I also kind of felt like I couldn't make a diverse cast because of the set in Japan, which is kind of bullshit, but yeah. So this time I want to make the cast more diverse. The new version will still be urban fantasy, meaning that the story will take place in the real world but with some fantasy aspect. However, the reboot will focus more on the characters, not really on the fantasy world and world building. Also, it will still be placed in our current time. Next element of the 7 elements of story are characters. I will talk about my characters in way more detail in their respective redesign videos and in other videos as well, but I still want to briefly mention the overall changes I'm planning. Like I said in my previous section, the characters are Japanese in the old version because the story is set in Japan. Some characters had way more impact on the plot just because I liked them more. They were all hetero, cis and able-bodied in the beginning, but later on I started to create headcanons about my own characters that I felt I couldn't make canon. In the beginning they didn't really have personality, they were based on weird anime tropes and whatever random stuff I liked, but their personalities developed throughout the story. As I mentioned before, I want the cast to be more diverse. I also want to give them more flaws, give the rather passive characters more agency, and base the characters on how they develop later in the old version. Now that I know my characters way better, I know them for 12 years, I also want to plan their character arcs better, but we will see if that actually happens, since I really like when characters act on their own. Talking about characters, there are lots of relationships in the old version. Most of them cis and hetero because that's all I saw in media that I consumed as a teenager. As time went on, I headcanoned most of them as queer because it just felt natural to me, so I might as well make it canon in the reboot now. Still, many of them are in seemingly straight pairings. That's not a bad thing, there are many different kind of queer relationships, but on one hand, I don't want people to think that I promote heteronormativity and romance, but on the other hand, pairing the characters up gave them some really good interactions and development naturally. I don't really know what I should do about it, if I just should ignore it, change the characters' genders like I did for Naoki and Yukiko, or if I should make them not romantic anymore. For example, I was thinking of making Shinsuke a woman, so this pairing is sapphic, and I love my rare sapphic content. Please recommend me good sapphic media, please, I'm starving. But the problem is that I have a feeling this might change the characters a lot, even if it's not supposed to happen. I will probably do it anyway. Maybe I should just not care about people's assumption. What do you guys think? On to the next element. Tone. In the old version, the beginning was very easygoing and happy, just a silly tone, with shonen manga vibes and random teenage ideas, but as time went by and I majored, the tone shifted to be a more serious vibe. It was never grimdark though, because I really enjoy a mix of fluff and angst. It's the best thing ever. And I pretty much want the same tone for the reboot like in the newest chapters of the old version, sometimes serious and dark since it will deal with themes of trauma, but still with light-hearted moments and slice of life, hopeful, loving, reflective, and of course, a mix of fluff and angst. Next element of the 7 elements of story, point of view. I will expand on the topic about the point of view or rather character arcs in the next video, so I just want to mention this briefly. In theory, our protagonist Yuri is our point of view character in the old version. But in the actual comic, it constantly changed, and whoever I favored in that moment was a point of view character. I did have favorites who had more screen time than my own main character. I know, not very great. In the reboot, I still want the point of view to change between characters depending on what happens in the story. However, I want the main story to be focused on Yuri, and the subplots are supposed to push the narrative of the main story forward. The next of the 7 elements of story, Theme. I think it's debatable if stories need themes planned out right from the beginning or any at all, but my comic does have them. In the beginning, the comic just used to be a mix of shonen manga and other media that I liked. There were no real pre-planned themes when I started it, maybe except for Good vs. Evil, but I like how certain themes developed as I matured, and as I got older, the story gradually began to focus more and more on the interpersonal relationships between characters. Themes like family, sense of belonging, self-acceptance, and self-confidence emerged, and I want to keep these themes in the reboot as well. As the comic went on, it kind of developed on its own, and the message became, no matter how much you struggle, everything will be okay in the end. If it's very into the shonen genre, let's be real, I love shonen. I love the screaming, power of friendship, the willpower, family, especially found family, trying to become better. I love supernatural powers and action, and I want these in the new versions as well, but without the sometimes very questionable stuff that happens in shonen, for example, unnecessary fan service and toxic masculinity. The next element is conflict. There are different types of conflicts your characters can encounter throughout your story. Man versus man, man versus nature, man versus society, man versus technology, man versus supernatural, man versus fate, and man versus self. The old version's conflict was man versus supernatural and man versus man because of the monsters and the secret evil organization. Later on, the conflict man versus self was way more prominent. The conflict in the reboot will be focused on characters versus characters, because I love to focus on character relationships and interactions, character versus self, because all my characters have to deal with trauma, especially most of my trauma that I try to cope with via my story. Character versus society, and I guess character versus supernatural and character versus fate as well. And these were the 7 elements of story. There are a billion other things I want to change for the reboot, but that would be too much for this video. However, I'm super hyped for all these changes, believe it or not. It's very ironic that I'm so excited about them, because the reason it took so long for me to reboot my old comic was that I didn't want to give up and change something. I didn't want to give up on something I worked so hard on. But here's the most important piece of advice I ever got in regards to making comics. A few years ago, before I even decided to reboot my comic, I watched 4 time-saving tips from a guy who spent 13 years drawing a comic by Lars Martinsen on YouTube. The 4 tips he presents are absolute gold. I highly recommend watching this video. I watched it multiple times. It shows up in my recommendations every now and then, and I watch it every time. His tips are: fail faster, pick your battles, embrace creative laziness, let nothing be sacred. His advice is crucial for me in this reboot. Let nothing be sacred. It's okay to change your story, your characters, your design, and it's okay to restart all over again. You don't have to stick to the first idea, you have to experience and learn and fail. I cannot stress enough how good this video is. Everyone, please watch it. I will refer to this video during this reboot series a lot, you can bet on it. That's it for now. Thanks for following my first reboot ramble. You might have noticed there will be some topics that I'm not very knowledgeable in, so if you have questions regarding anything or suggestions, tips or answers about the stuff I'm not sure about, I would greatly appreciate them. I'm only asking you to be respectful when commenting. Thank you! Once again, all the links to my resources are in the description. The next reboot ramble will be about structuring and outlining my comic reboot, so stay tuned. Also, a huge thanks to my fellow D&D party member and good friend Pan Fried Fish Stick for helping me out with their knowledge about storytelling and proofreading my script, both the first very long draft and then the 2 individual video scripts, because I decided to split it into 2 videos. Sending you lots of love! Thank you so much for watching this. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like or subscribing to see more. See you in the next video. Bye!